So Jim sent questions ahead of time, kind of covering what the LCC has either issues with or problems in the past. So we just kind of put this here as to what we'll be covering. So just a little bit of the designation terms, the purpose of a designation, the use, regulatory requirement, what CalRecycle is required to do, how we process the PODs, the collectors to submit 303 reporting, impacts to your designation for non-compliance, and how you can stay informed. Next slide, please. So this is just a short version of the terms that we're using for local government. So if you see abbreviations for LG or DAC for designated approved collector designation, I refer to the POD, proof of designation, sometimes as POD, but we do use it as designation. And this just tells you what the terms mean. So. Okay, so the proof of designations are not a requirement. It is for local government, that is. It is an option. So collectors can and do operate without a designation. It's just that you'll have to obtain the source information of who you collected from and the number of items you collected from. In obtaining a designation from local government, there's no straight line to doing that. You would just need to call the local government or on their website and search for what programs they have, whether it's e-waste, recycling, or waste management or hazardous waste. And you would find the contact person there, usually an HHW specialist or manager could probably point you in the right direction. So, and it's the local government that will usually approach the collector. I've seen it go the other way, but it is the local government who is supposed to approach a collector for services. So next slide. And this is the current version of our designation. If you have any saved pages to our CalRecycle links, you may have to get rid of those because we've made updates to those pages. And this was the last one that was done for the proof of designation on our website. So this should have revision October 2020. Don't know if you can see it. It looks like it got cut off, but the very top, it should say revised 2020. Anything prior to that will be rejected because it doesn't have the same information as this one does. And the way it looks, some things have been removed and some things have been added. So you just want to make sure you have the current one. And if you don't have it and don't have the link, you can always email me or call me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Next slide. Okay. Again, proof of designation is an option that the local government does not have to use. They can issue they are the ones that issues the proof of designation through a designated approved collector, meaning they are a collector in our program, so that they can participate with claim submittal and reimbursement later on. If it's just a collector or someone that's just there in the city, they'll not be allowed to participate in the program. The proof of designation allows the collector to obtain information, does not require them to obtain individual source names when they're collecting for the city or county. So it just alleviates that headache of doing that, unless it's a business with 5 items or more. And only one approved collector may be admitted on the form. So if the local government has multiple collectors, they will have to have a proof of designation for each collector that they have, not lump them together. Next slide. So when we receive the proof of designation, it goes into our e-waste designations email. We have 30 days to process it, but the proof of designation needs to be submitted 30 days prior. So if you're going to have an event, let's see, we'll use March 1st. It would need to be submitted to CalRecycle by February 1st. do that 30-day window of review. And if there's issues with it, you have time to correct it and resubmit it. So usually if there is an issue with the designation, I'll send an issue email. You have 20 days from that day to correct it. And then I have the remaining 10 days of that 30-day window to get it processed. If there's any changes to the designation at all, whether it's contact information or the signatory, please notify us in writing so we can update that information. If a designation comes in and it's not the compliant 30-day window, we'll process it, or I'll process it 30 days from the date I received it. So if it came in today and you have the date of February 1st, I will process it from today's date, 30 days from today's date. So the February 1st date will be stricken. We cannot change the date going backwards. We can only change the date moving forward. And the end date, whatever date you submit, is the date that we'll use and cannot be changed. So if you want to use a different designation period between the start and end date, you would need to submit a new one, and then I'll just terminate the one that was previously submitted. So local government can terminate the POD at any time as well. Next slide. When you're providing the collection log, to make sure that you have a separate collection log for each collection activity that falls under a designation, especially when you're going to be submitting that for your claim reimbursement, because that holds up the process for the claim reviewer. If that's missing, then it'll take a bit longer to review and get payment. So make sure you have the total number of units and estimated weights on the log for CRTs, and the total number of unit and estimated weights for your CRTs. Make sure you specify if it's a CRT or non-CRT, because it makes a difference with the documentation for how the items are paid. Each collector to submit a 303 report to local government is basically information that you provide to your local government stating how much material you provided for them, whether it's by weight and per quarter or fiscal period. The 303 reporting will be mentioned on the next slide. When you do submit your claim with the POD attached, make sure to use the current version of that designation. So if there was a POD that you have with the date stricken and changed, or the collector's signatory might have changed, or the contact might have changed, make sure that once we get that in and we sign it and send it back to you, that's the one that you submit moving forward with your future claims, because everything needs to match with the documentation. And of course, notify us if there's any changes to contacts as soon as you can, usually 30 days before, but there's always unforeseen circumstances. So it says 10 days here, but the sooner the better. Okay. So the public agencies are responsible for submitting their HHW management database. So local government, the collector submits their 303 reporting to local government by September 1st, and local government submits their HHW or 303 information to CalRecycle by October 1st. So the local government and collectors may have an arrangement that maybe the collector submits their information to them. I don't know if it's monthly, quarterly, as long as they get all the information to them by September 1st, local government's good, and then they can provide that to us. Some local government submits their collectors 303 on their own. So if you have not submitted a 303 before and you're new to that, there is a web pass that you need to get on the site for participating in that, and you can contact Russ Carter. He's the 303 specialist. He'll actually be attending the HHW tomorrow. So if you have any questions about that, you can email me or you can email him and I can forward it to him, however you want to do that. So
I have a question for you, Lynette, regarding this. So if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like there are some approved collectors that do the 303 reporting directly rather than sending it to the jurisdiction first?
They do send it directly to, yes, they submit it themselves in the 303 portal.
Okay,
So some do it themselves, some have their local government do it.
gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Impacts to your designation. And that would be if there's any issues going on with, violation of applicable laws, whether it's you have a current case that's pending with our civil penalties unit, your designation, or excuse me, your collector status may be suspended or terminated usually suspended at that time, and you have issues that you need to clear up before you can be returned back to active. Just things like that. So net cost report if you're not submitting those on time. So anything that may require issues to be resolved and they're not, then that definitely affects your standing to have a designation, active designation. If your POD is terminated or suspended, you will no longer be able to act as a collector for that local government until all the issues are cleared up. If you are suspended from the program or your designation status is suspended at that time, it's your responsibility to notify the local government in writing regarding the circumstances that led to the change or the status. Let them know that your POD is invalid. That way they have the opportunity to either use someone else at the time or at least make other arrangements for collection. The collector may file an appeal from a revocation or suspension, or specifically the revocation. And then once everything's gone through and if they're successful in their appeal, then they can return as an active collector. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, it wouldn't move.
So CalRecycle, once we receive the designation, we are responsible for making sure we get the designation email sent to the persons in a timely fashion. So if it is the local government and the collector and whoever else is on the initial email, that is who I will send it to when I process the POD. Otherwise, it'll just go to the local government contact and the collector itself. If you do not receive an email confirmation from me within a week, you can notify me or my supervisor, Rebecca, asking what the status is. Also, that the bottom portion of the designation form needs to be filled out. So that section where it says CalRecycle use is specifically for me to fill out. If it is not filled out, then the POD is not active. It is not official. So this looks like it just repeats something from the previous slide. Oh yeah, so the beginning date is the date, first date of the collection activities date. And no parties, the collector, local government, or CalRecycle shall change the start date going backwards. Okay. So to avoid delays, make sure you get your POD in as early as possible. We're still in COVID, so I know there's not a lot of staff around, a lot of either telework or shared work, or people are out sick. So make sure you get that in as soon as possible. Download the current form of the proof of designation so that you're not sending me the wrong one and I have to kick that back. Again, any previous versions of the form are outdated, so the information that you need on there when entering the information, such as, let's see, drop off. There used to be the section that just said drop off, pick up, load check, or something like that. But now it says permanent drop off and permanent site. So if you check the box for permanent address, you'll have to provide the name of the place that the permanent drop off and the address. And when we say permanent drop off, means that is the location that is always the drop-off location for that local government, meaning it never changes. So if you have drop-offs at your collection event and those move around, then that would be temporary drop-off. Don't think I have anything else. Make sure to fill out as much information as you can about the description. I've seen very short information just says e-waste or residents. So more detail you can give me, the better, to explain how you're going to be collecting and what kind of material will be collected. It really helps with the processing of that. So, and again, 20 days to correct it and 10 days left for me of that 30 days to finalize it.
Yeah. So if I may, Lynette, an example for any of you regarding temporary and permanent. A permanent would be like if you're picking up e-waste from a jurisdiction's corp yard, or at a MRF or something similar. That's a permanent location.
Correct.
As opposed to the temporary, which is obvious.
Yes. Okay. So if you want to subscribe to the listserv so you can stay informed about changes that are happening or updates and whatnot, that's the website there. You can contact me directly or the e-waste designations, which is the email address that we use when I process the designation. So all of the submittals for your proof of designations need to go to the e-waste designations email address, because that's where I'm processing it. If it's just a question that you have for me before you're doing anything with your POD, and then you could just contact me directly by phone or email.
Cool. Thank
So
you
that's
so
it.
much.
That's all I have.
Okay.
I'm so glad we stayed connected.
Yeah. So I have a few questions for you, and I also want to invite all of you that are on the call to put any questions into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. But my first question is about collecting abandoned or source anonymous e-waste for jurisdiction. Is it a requirement, and I don't know if that's the right term, that the collector operate under a POD in order to pick up abandoned e-waste if they have been directed or under contract or agreement with that local jurisdiction? Do they need to have the POD to do that?
I'm not sure if you necessarily need to have a POD for the abandoned waste, but if you have a POD, everything's covered under that designation. There's no separate recovering CRTs and other items, and we don't do abandoned waste. So if you have a POD, and everything's covered under there, as specifically related to whatever the terms of contract are for your local government.
Okay, so
I'll try to get more clarification on that, but I believe if you have a designation, the designation should cover everything. And if you have abandoned waste, you would just submit the source anonymous log that specifies the items of or number of items that were sourced abandoned waste.
Okay, so you would still submit that 198 SA with the POD.
Yes.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong, Jennifer, chime in here. But yes, because if they're doing the service for the county or the city, that should be covered under there. Unless they have some other waste management that covers their abandoned waste.
Okay. I think it depends on the designation too. On the designation, there will be a box where they can check for illegal disposal cleanup.
That's true.
So if you plan on doing this, make sure that the local government is aware of it and that you have that checked.
Right.
And that would definitely cover it. There may be, other situations maybe the local government didn't tell you, hey, can you go out to this road and pick this up? Maybe, you just become aware of a situation where it's dumped on a roadside. Having that illegal disposal checked on the designation would allow you to go collect that and then include it in a claim.
Right.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. And Jennifer, for those of you on the call, Jennifer works with Lynette in that same department. So
Yes. She is my right hand backup.
sorry, I didn't introduce you at the top, Jennifer.
That's okay.
Just a further point of clarification then, because this is where a lot of this information got a little bit muddy in the past. And so I'm really thankful that you guys are clearing things up. If you have a POD from a local government agency, then you can use that POD if you, as a collector, are setting up drop-off events.
The collector's setting up drop-off events?
Yeah, or do they have to be city-sponsored drop-off events in order for the POD to be used?
If they are city-sponsored drop-off events, they don't necessarily use their PODs, but usually the events are, yes, put on by the city or the county. So I do not believe the local government, or excuse me, the proof of the collector, the collector puts on the events. So unless it's stated with your designation and collection locations as an attachment of where they go collect these items, they should not be going out to put on events. So usually with your proof of designation, you'll have an attachment, and that attachment says, these are the collection locations that we go out and do pickups at. So there's usually a designated place, unless the local government's doing something separate from that, which then they may send us a notification later on saying, we're going to be hosting a collection event there. But yes, if you have the POD for that, you still need to have everything that's covered under that designation. So like I said in the beginning, it's best to have as much information on your POD as possible so that we know what's happening and where.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. It's going to be similar to the illegal disposal. There'll be a place on the designation where the local government can specify that temporary special events will happen. So if the local government wants you to do those kind of collections, then they need to make sure that is checked. And like Lynette was saying, have that specified in the description of collection. That way it's very clear to both the claim reviewer, the local government, and the collector what collection is going to be occurring and how it's going to occur.
Right.
So just make sure that's why checking all those boxes and having that description is really important.
So Jennifer, a scenario, when I worked at one of the cores in Oakland, I did repeated e-waste drop-off events at a Whole Foods in Oakland, I think it was. If the city of Oakland had given me a POD, and I was contacted by Whole Foods to do those events, the city did not contact me. It wasn't sponsored by the city. I would not use my POD for that type of a drop-off event. Am I correct?
Correct.
Or would it depend on how it was, what box was checked on the POD?
So it sounds like you're asking if the grocery store wanted to put on an event and if you would be allowed to do this event for them and collect the items from them on behalf of the city. If they are not a part of the collection locations, I don't think that is not allowed. So I think you would need the collector would need to contact the local government to find out what they would be doing about that event. So it's not local government, collectors should not be, I wouldn't say outsourcing. They should not be going to other businesses asking to do collection events or collecting on their behalf, and other businesses should not be contacting the collectors to say, well, they can say, we want you to do this, but it's still the collector that should go to the local government and say, this event wants to take place. So there would have to be a different set of circumstances for that. It's just
Okay,
collectors are collecting on behalf of local government. So if local government's not directing them to do that, then they should not be doing that.
they should not use the POD in that circumstance. Okay,
Correct.
great. Good, thank you for clarifying that, because there was, I think, some gray area regarding that. Also, can you please explain who you need to have PODs? What government entities do you need to have a POD from? So if you have a county and you have a JPA and you have individual cities, whose POD covers what?
So if you have a POD for the county, then you'd be collecting on behalf of the county. If it's the JPA, then you would specify in the top area of the JPA that it's a JPA. I know it's hard to filter the cities when it's under a jurisdiction like that, but if there's a JPA, we normally have a list in our program that is either a waste management authority or something association where there's a large group like that. So I guess when you talk to your local government and you ask them who it is you'll be covering for, because we don't have a say in whether or not it's a county, city, or JPA. It's usually determined by the local government how they're going to use their POD.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if a county issues a POD, it is only for the non-incorporated county lands. It does not cover all the cities. Is that correct? Unless
it's specified on the POD, yes. Unincorporated or cities of or surrounding areas of.
Okay, because there was some confusion in the past that if you got a POD from a county, then it was a blanket coverage for everything in the county, and that's not the case.
That is not the case.
Okay.
And
Good.
if we ever get a designation like that, I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth between POD and designation. POD is proof of designation. And when I just say designations, because I didn't say POD, I think I saw a flash of a question related to that. But yeah, if there's an issue with how that is written for the area of service or related to unincorporated, incorporated, and we start seeing something different later on in claims, then I definitely call local government and go, hey, what's going on with this? Because that's not what was submitted for the initial process. So.
Okay. So a couple of questions that came in on the chat. I just wanted to bring those up. One question is, so POD is needed whenever a local corps picks up any e-waste from a site sponsored by a city cleanup event or drop-off site. I think that's what you were asking there, Julio.
If they have the designation and it actually says on the form, city cleanups or yearly cleanups or whatever it is, and it's under designation, yes, you need to have that designation because it specifies that on your form.
Okay. The other question brings in the NOI. So what is the difference between an NOI and a POD?
The notice of intent?
Yeah.
The notice of intent, I believe, sounds like that it is with DTSC.
I can answer that if you'd like.
Yeah.
So yeah, the NOI is the notice of intent, and that is with the Department of Toxic Substance Control. E-waste is regulated as universal waste. Therefore, it's listed as toxic or hazardous waste, which is the least toxic and hazardous waste of all that's listed. If you're conducting a collection event at a remote location, you're required as a approved collector to file an NOI 30 days in advance of that actual event. And the purpose of it is because it's regulated waste, if there was a spill, i.e. broken CRTs or broken flat panels, there's now a legacy that that event took place and that you were the collector at that event. If there was ever any soil sampling done and they found some of the constituents of those electronic components, they could go back to you as an approved collector and say, hey, did you have a spill on this site? And they could say, well, yeah, we show that you had an event there. So there's basically no getting out of it. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that because it is regulated waste, DTSC has the, as the regulatory agency, can visit your drop-off events unannounced because they want to make sure that you're in compliance with all of the safety rules that are required of you as an approved collector. Okay, any other questions? Any other
I see.
things that you guys would like to ask Lynette or Jennifer?
I see four notifications in the chat, unless that's just on my side. And you may have already answered the questions. I don't know.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Well,
Also, I just want to remind everyone, if I'm not available, Jennifer's available. As I said, Jim said, I started with claims. I trained Jennifer in claims and then moved on to designation. So sometimes I still need to go back to her and like, okay, how do we do this again? Because I don't do claims anymore. I've also made her my backup designation because I trained her in that. So she's very, very astute with the information. Sometimes I forget, especially if you ask, how do you do such and such? And you do it for so long on autopilot, now you have to explain it. I'm like, wait, how do I do that again? So if there's anything I'm missing, she's available to help too. So,
great.
and specifically for claim stuff too.
Yeah, very good. So yes, thank you. And as you, all of you folks at the local cores, as you engage with your local government agencies, the best thing to do is to refer them to Lynette as a starting point for them to fill out the designation form, because there's a lot of questions and they can walk them through that process. And they are the agency which has the oversight, if you will, and I don't know if that's the right term, Lynette, of the POD. And they can put an expiration date on it according to what they feel they want to do. Am I correct in saying that, Lynette?
Yes, the local government has the discretion of determining the length of the designation. So whether it's a one-day event, a year event, 5 years, we don't mandate the time period.
Okay.
So I just saw a question.
Yeah. So can a local core obtain a POD from a city if that city has already issued a POD to another e-waste collector or recycler?
Can the local government issue another POD, or can the collector get another POD?
I'll reread it. Can the Conservation Corps, the local core, obtain a POD from a city if that city has already issued a POD to another e-waste collector?
Yes. Yeah. Local government can have multiple collectors collecting on their behalf.
Yep.
It's just one named collector per designation form.
For designation. So,
yep.
And then just to reiterate, when you do it, when you make a collection of e-waste under that POD, that load needs to be segregated as it goes off to your recycler. You cannot combine it with other e-waste collected at other events, even if it's under the same POD, or with collections that you've done not under a POD. So they have to be completely segregated.
Yes.
Because remember, on the back end, you need to report to your local government agency that issued that POD what you collected under that POD. So the loads must be segregated, and you should give your recycler a heads up that you're sending in that load, and that you've marked it, put all the necessary signage on it or whatever they need for them to know that this is a segregated load being handled under a POD. Okay. Any last questions? We've got about 3 minutes left. Okay.
Jennifer, you have anything you might want to add on the claim side, or is everything covered?
I think we've talked about the important things, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but if you do get a designation from a local government, make sure that when you use it in claims, the bottom of the form where it says for CalRecycle use only has been completed by CalRecycle. Very important. It lets the recycler know that it was submitted to CalRecycle, it was processed. Occasionally, we will see a designation form in claims that does not have that filled out. And we'll go to look it up, and somewhere along the line, someone dropped the ball. It was never submitted to us. And therefore what they collected is not covered. And so it won't be eligible for our program. So definitely make sure that anytime you use a POD, that bottom part is filled out by CalRecycle. And if you're ever unsure if you have an active designation or not, call us. We're happy to help you look it up for you.
Thank you. Good point, Jennifer. Thank you. Okay. Well, if there are any other questions you think of, please do email them to me, and I will forward them on to Lynette or Jennifer, and we can get those questions answered for you. So with that, we can go ahead and close out. Again, thank you, Lynette and Jennifer. Appreciate your time and all the great information.
All right.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks to all the core staff that attended too.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to every one of you from this course who came into the meeting today.